customer service, done right, can be your company's single biggest competitive advantage. Welcome to the Customer Service Revolution. Join customer service authority and best-selling author John DeJulius as he interviews leaders who are revolutionizing their industries. This is more than a podcast, though. It's a movement. The Customer Service Revolution is a radical overthrow of conventional business mentality designed to transform what customers and employees experience. If you're a revolutionary customer service leader who's ready to stop competing on price and obsessed with building a brand that people cannot live without, this podcast is for you.
Need help getting brilliant at the basics? Contact Claudia at thedejuliusgroup.com and find out how the team of consultants at the DeJulius Group can help you get there.
Welcome, revolutionaries, to episode 151 of the Customer Service Revolution podcast. I am John DeJulius, Chief Revolution Officer of the DeJulius Group. On today's episode, we will be sharing a pre-recorded presentation with Dave Murray, Vice President of Consulting at the DeJulius Group, and I discussing our new upcoming book, The Employee Experience Revolution. Why did we write it, and why is it so critical now for leaders to increase morale, retain their workforce, and drive business growth? You will also get to enjoy the valuable Q&A we had at the end of our presentation with audience members. Enjoy. If you heard me talk long enough, you've heard me say, what are you consuming? I ask myself that. I ask my leaders that. I ask my employees. I like to say that I am the Joey Chestnuts of consuming my topic. I love to ask my leaders and team members, what are they consuming to become smarter than they were yesterday, to become a better person, to live an extraordinary life so countless others do? Well, I'm going to share with you how you can make consuming content fun and enjoyable for you and your team through Better Book Club. Many agree if you can't grow people, you can't grow your business. I believe one of the best ways to grow your people is through reading. No program on the planet recognizes and rewards reading like Better Book Club. Not at all a traditional book club. Better Book Club is a radically better way to build the habit of reading in your team members. And once the habit of reading is established, anything is possible. Learn more at betterbookclub.com. That's betterbookclub.com.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Employee Experience Revolution. Today, you are going to be hearing from co-authors of their new book launching in June, titled The Employee Experience Revolution, from John DeJulius, best-selling author, president, and chief revolution officer of the DeJulius Group, and Dave Murray, future best-selling author and VP of consulting for the DeJulius Group.
Thank you, Lindsay. And welcome, Dave Murray, author.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Sounds pretty good.
Is it true that you make your wife and kids say that when they say, Dad, author?
100% true.
I love that.
I'm not sure how long it's going to last, but it's working now.
I love that. I love that. Okay, it is said often that our jobs don't define us, but what we do for a living, our careers and who we decide to work for are huge parts of who we are. We spend a significant amount of time working. Every leader should realize the impact that they have and needs to be rewarding and fulfilling in addition to the financial compensation an employee receives. Leaders need to build the type of company that helps employee be proud of, they work for, and allows them to have the opportunity to live their best life ever. Dave, I'd love to have you share why you are so passionate, which led me to make it a no-brainer to ask you to co-author this book. Why the Employee Experience Revolution?
Well, John, there's a couple of reasons. In our consulting practice, we see it happen all the time. We're working with organizations that want to do great things. They want to focus on the external customer experience, but very often where they miss the mark is they forget about their internal customers experience, their employee experience, and it's not matching, right? So they're setting expectations to go deliver this, but they're not delivering that internally. And a lot of times that's why they miss the mark. But there was a reason that really drew me to this topic years and years ago, before I was even with the DeJulius Group. So beyond 11 years ago, since today is my 11th anniversary with
Today is your 11th anniversary at the DeJulius Group.
Yes, it is.
That is so cool.
So,
and we didn't plan this.
No, we didn't. But probably 14, 15 years ago, I was working in professional sports. I was in a sales and service function, overseeing a couple of teams that were taking inbound calls, outbound calls. And I remember one of our senior leaders trying to make an impact, trying to rally the troops from a sales side of things. And he actually came into a room and he told everyone in the room that there were 100 people out there that would kill for your jobs, and they'd actually take your jobs for less money. So you better kick into gear or you're out of here. And I'm sure the goal was to motivate sales, but what I actually saw happen was really deflating, right? People were deflated by that. And it reminds me of what I heard a few times from Simon Sinek and others, that old kind of way of thinking, kind of the Jack Welch playbook of sales back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, has really done some damage to internal cultures over time. And here I was kind of watching that play out live and in person in this meeting, where I was in cultures that were pretty good, but there were just some missteps. And because of those missteps, great people would leave. Great people would find other positions because they felt they didn't have a future within that organization. And it was just a shame to see, because all they really needed to do was have a concerted effort to make sure that the experience of their internal team members was a focus.
That's great. That's great. And you are a master at this. And like you said, I think you tell me if I have it right. As consultants at the DeJulius Group, I think since the pandemic, we'll go in and a company will hire us to help them with their customer experience. And it feels like 40, 50, maybe even 60% of the time, they say, stop. This is all great, but we have such high turnover and low morale that this won't stick. Our employees won't do it, or we'll have different set of employees next month. Mm-hmm. And we'll have to train them all over again. Let's work on the employee experience. You think that's accurate? I mean, we've had that a little bit pre-pandemic, but it seems like it feels like at least 50% now.
Yes, I think that's very accurate, John. We're hearing that a lot, where when we go in and kind of lay out the plan for what we're going to do on the consulting side of things, the initial feedback we're hearing is we need to start with that internal culture. We need to work on that employee experience first, because that's our greatest need. That's where we have to fill the gaps in order for the rest of the work to stick. Absolutely. We hear that more and more. And you're right, especially since the pandemic.
Yeah. So the Employee Experience Revolution, these webinars the book doesn't actually come out till June 10th. So you're getting a prequel or whatever that terminology is called. These are the chapters. And we're visiting chapter 2, welcoming to the Employee Experience Revolution, and basically the why to it. So let's get started here. And listen, the Great Resignation, also called the Big Quit, refers to employees who voluntarily quit their companies at a higher than usual rate during the pandemic, 2020 to 2022, which was 4 years, a couple weeks ago when it started. However, these employees' resignations, if you look by this chart, began a decade earlier. It just, went up. So this is the quit rate that you're looking at. Research reveals that the quit rate started to climb in 2009 when we were coming out of the Great Recession, kept rising, and then gained momentum for the next 10 years. That's important to understand the why behind it. And one of the reasons is greedflation. And this will explain that.
The CEO to worker pay gap has expanded exponentially over the past several decades. The Economic Policy Institute estimates that CEO compensation has grown 1,322% since 1978, while typical worker compensation has risen 18%. The Institute for Policy Studies estimates that 80% of S&P 500 companies pay their CEO over 100 times more than they pay their median worker.
And listen, I mean, the degree to which CEO compensation grew in the pandemic, as people were struggling and people were laid off, is what else can you say other than shameful?
Thoughts, Dave?
Yeah, it's interesting how at a time when struggle was happening like that, that the focus was on dollars for senior leadership as opposed to helping overall organizations survive, helping team members survive and get through it. And it really kind of speaks to why we have this book, right? That the fact where a lot of organizations lost their way is they're focused on profits and revenue and a lot of key drivers to their business, which are important, but they're not focused on some of the internal metrics that are so important as far as team member growth, team member stability, psychological safety, all those things that go into a strong culture. And it just seems like a lot of organizations lost their way. So much so that, the great resignation or quiet quitting that we heard so much a couple of years ago coming out of the pandemic, that this was the new thing. It really wasn't about the employees now that we look back at it. It was more so about the employers and the fact that they weren't focused on their team members. They weren't providing what they needed to really thrive within their role and within the organization. And so team members started to look for that elsewhere. And as we'll talk a little later in today's session, they found ways to do that. And with the work from home and all the things that came out of the pandemic, there were so many more options than there were before. But it was when this was happening, right, in the moment in 2022, it was real easy to blame the workers. It was real easy to blame the generation, right? The Gen Zs, that they don't want to work and all those things. And that wasn't really the case, right? It was the fact that the organizations weren't providing to them what they needed to really thrive in their roles. And the other thing that was really interesting that we learned coming out of the pandemic is that those younger generations, right? So younger millennials and Gen Z, they had learned over time, right, from watching their parents that were either maybe Gen X or boomers, watching their parents kind of go through their careers and the struggles and working to build a better life for their children like we all try and do. But they saw firsthand that it didn't always work, right? There wasn't always the payoff. And a lot of times trading those more hours and working overtime, working weekends, whatever it was that they were doing, didn't always give the payback that they really wanted or were looking for. And they started to realize that valuing the hours spent with people as opposed to the work was sometimes more important. So they came into it with a different attitude. And I think the pandemic really just accelerated that because, as you mentioned earlier, John, that trend was already taking place. Right. The trend of people leaving their jobs and what that looked like, that was already underway going back to 2010, 2012. That was happening. And then the pandemic really just kind of accelerated it because, more opportunities came up, work from home and all those sorts of things. And so we're in a new landscape now. And that's why we need to adjust.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there, Dave. First, we obviously talk a lot more in this chapter in the book about shareholder theory versus stakeholder theory. Mm-hmm. And as you kind of said, a lot of people blame Milton Friedman because he, kind of came out with, it's all about the shareholder. The purpose of a company is to increase value for shareholder, and the rest will take care of itself. And people have argued, and I agree with their argument, that it's about the shareholders of a company, not the stakeholder. If you take care of your stakeholder, hopefully I said it right, it's about the stakeholders, the employees, the customers, the vendors, community, then the shareholders will benefit. The other thing is, as you talk about this canceling of hustle culture really bothered me when I heard millennials canceled the word hustle. I'm like, what do you mean? And it was everything I've ever felt like I did to get here and everything I've taught my kids and all that. And then I researched and saw, like you explained, they had a front row seat. And there was kind of two results that their parents or grandparents happened. Like you said, some of it didn't pay off financially. People had, their parents worked till the day they died, right? And never, got anything, it didn't benefit them. But then on the flip side, for those who it did financially benefit, they came at a cost. And usually the cost is relationships at home. So, when I kind of read and did research and asked the younger generation why, who's to say I'm right? And, they don't want to just work to live. So I don't know, a lot of good stuff there. So basically they had the pandemic was a professional awakening. If you ever heard from someone who literally survived a near-death experience, the employees reevaluated their professional careers, not only in regards to what they wanted, but also what they weren't willing to tolerate anymore. And too many leaders used the Great Resignation era as a crutch. A significant percentage of people quitting post-pandemic did so as a result of poor company culture. And the other thing that you have to understand, that our listeners have to understand, we're still going through it. From the end of 2009 or 2010 until literally today, we are going through the longest stretch of an economic boom, minus whatever I don't want to call it a blip, but the pandemic had, which makes leaders, and I'm guilty of it too, or have been guilty of it too, take the eye off the ball of culture, of customer experience, because we're just so damn busy. And so we're not worried about the things we should be worried about. I want to show this video of a younger generation talking about what they want.
The pandemic altered my life in a way where it made me remember that, like, it's my life at the end of the day and I get to make the decisions about it.
I knew that my job at a restaurant and those days were over, that I wanted to go to a place that had well-being in mind.
I finally had time to sit with myself and reflect on my life.
Having that moment of reflection just reminded me of my goals and what I want for myself and my family.
I feel like the bar has really gone down for what people are willing to tolerate after having all this time to reflect.
One of the major changes that I like and it needs to stay the same is remote working. People get to enjoy life more, but still get to enjoy the city more, and they're not burnt out.
Even if it's as simple as you get more personal days.
Employees are people too, with families and responsibilities and things that they do outside of work.
I think the thing that we really need for jobs to understand is humanity. We want to do our jobs, but we just need some flexibility. That's all we need.
All right.
So, John, one thing that I want to mention coming off of that video and coming off of the conversation about the professional awakening and what we learned after, right? In the moment, we were all saying it's the generation, they don't want to work and all those things. And what we learned after the fact, as you just mentioned, that a lot of people reported leaving because of the company culture. And you were talking about how in good times, maybe it's not as much of a focus. If sales are good, everything must be great. So we don't focus on those things like customer service and internal culture. We kind of go into autopilot as organizations, and then that starts to eventually catch up to you. But another thing that's really interesting about the pandemic, and it's funny because here we are, 4 years removed from the actual pandemic, but we're still dealing with so much impact that it had on our workforce and on our cultures. But one of the biggest, and really goes back to the topic of today's webinar, why employee experience, why now? One of the biggest issues is what is referred to as accidental managers. Right. So, and we're going to talk about accidental managers in future chapters. So I'm just going to kind of touch on it briefly here, and it is part of the conversation in some of our future chapters. But the interesting thing about accidental managers is they're defined as managers, leaders, supervisors, whomever, that are given the title of a manager and have maybe the job knowledge, the hard skill knowledge, but have no training in management whatsoever outside of maybe some classes in college, right? So there's no specific training to be a manager in that role. That's lacking in so many organizations. And here's such an interesting stat that goes back to the pandemic. So the organization that did this study, they found that in 2019, 68% of managers were considered accidental managers, right? So that's contributing to these culture issues where they're not focused on support and driving a great culture. They're just focused on numbers or other metrics.
And Dave, I believe, and you might be about to say this, sorry, but I believe a percentage of that, like in the 20s, are senior leaders who
25%.
25%. Yeah, that's
25%,
crazy.
yeah. And so here's the other thing that how the pandemic accelerated so many issues we're seeing today with employee experience and internal culture. So back in 2019, it was 68%. When they did that study again at the end of 2023, so just a few short months ago, that number went up to 82%. Right? So 82% of managers that we have out there aren't fully equipped to manage their teams, to manage others. And just think of what that's doing to the internal cultures out there.
Right. Yeah. You want to talk about employee loyalty unrewarded?
Sure. So what happens here is for many experienced employees, the great retention kind of paid off. And here's what's interesting. So people left, people saw those opportunities. And according to some research that was done in 2023, 60% of people who left actually saw an increase in their real earnings. We heard a lot of stories in the moment that the grass isn't always greener. We heard about people that left and then came back. But the reality was, and it goes to speak to our cultures and what our primary focus is, the reality was that people that did leave did wind up earning more dollars over time, right? It did wind up to be a better move for them. So the way the research tells us is 47% who remained in their job did not see that, right? Did not see a cost of living increase or increases. So when you factor in cost of living and all those things, the average employee who quit and found a new job enjoyed an increase in pay, while the average worker who stayed in place saw a loss during the pandemic, especially 2021 and 2022. So clearly, every organization needs to have a solid retention plan in place.
Yeah. I mean, the two biggest mistakes, your biggest expense is dissatisfied employees, right? 18% of engaged employees are more productive, 23% are more profitable, 81% have less absenteeism, and 43% of companies with engaged employees have less turnover. So it really shows how critical this is. Dave, you want to talk about this?
Absolutely. I would love to. So here's some more interesting
I love this.
results.
This shocks me.
It really does. It really does. When you think about what are the top reasons people say really makes their life fulfilling, what are they looking for out of their lives? A lot of times we think of the partner we choose in life, having kids, earning money to do things, that freedom it gives. Well, the Pew Research Center conducted a study to better understand really Americans' views of factors to leading a fulfilled life. And here's the surprising thing that came out of it. The majority surveyed said that job satisfaction was the most important, followed by friendship. So job satisfaction came in number one, friendship came in second. And even more surprisingly is how marriage and being a parent fell behind that, right? So job satisfaction and friendship really came in at the top. 71% of adults emphasize the extreme or very high importance of having an enjoyable job or career for a fulfilling life. Additionally, 61% placed an equal level of importance on having close friends. In contrast, only around 1 in 4 adults considered having children or being married as extremely or very important factors of achieving a fulfilling life. So you touched on this a little earlier, John, at the beginning of today's broadcast, where it's so important. Our job roles are so important to us, right? If you think about it, when you meet someone new for the first time at a cookout, at a party, what's one of the first or second things that come up? What do you do, right?
What do you do?
It's how we identify ourselves.
Yeah, right or wrong.
Right. And this really kind of backs that up, that not only is it something that we use to identify ourselves, but it's something we really kind of hang our hat on is for our importance and our fulfillment.
Yeah. Yeah. And whether you agree with, the other things, or if you say it's, that's top in yours, I would like to think, significant other relationships, having kids does rank higher, but you can't avoid the importance of job satisfaction.
If you enjoy what you're learning on the Customer Service Revolution podcast, you'll love our weekly newsletter, The E-Service. It's full of great customer experience tips and stories, includes special offers, webinars, and more each week. To sign up, head to tdg.click/e-service. That's tdg.click/e-service, ESERVICE. Enter your preferred email address, and you can look forward to great advice from John in your inbox every Wednesday.
And then this is another study, correlation between happiness at work and overall satisfaction. So caring for your employees impacts their professional life as well as the company's bottom line. It is impossible to separate the two, one's professional life from their personal life. And if an employee is miserable at their job and works in a toxic environment, their overall happiness will be impacted. So that just shows the importance of a work life. And as leaders, I think we need to do better. Our employees deserve better. Two biggest mistakes we have seen companies make, probably before the pandemic, but definitely since the pandemic, is one, filling positions with just anyone. And two, which is just as bad, is keeping poor performers. Dave, I don't know if you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so 100%. And, we had a question pop up, John, that I just want to answer quickly. The study that I just shared about how what I do for work and the fulfillment I get from my work and also my friends came in higher than family. Someone in the chat asked the question of who was surveyed, what age group was responding. We can dig a little deeper, see if we can find a more thorough answer. But what the research reported was that it was a survey of U.S. adults. So it didn't give specific ages, it just said adults in the workforce. So if we can find more out, we will find that out for sure.
Yeah. And with the slides, you'll get, it says where you can find it. The Few research, and it looks like the title of it is Public Has Mixed Views on Modern American Family. So they actually, it was more the topic of mixed views on family.
Right.
But, again, I don't necessarily agree with these results, maybe just from a personal standpoint, but I do. It just re-emphasizes the importance of having a job that we enjoy.
100%. Okay. So this is an interesting concept as well. And maybe you've heard this when you were a youngster. Maybe your grandmother, I remember my grandmother saying this to me, or maybe one of your parents said this to you. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? And so when we hear that, we always think about, your friend group, right? I have a senior in high school right now, and we're always talking about her friend group, who she's hanging out with. We're lucky. She has a great friend group, but sometimes that doesn't always go so well, right? So who's in your friend group? And so we hear that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, which is true, right? You start to pick up on habits, laziness, bad habits, good habits, all those things kind of come to light, and you start to act similarly. Well, what's interesting and what organizations don't think about is that applies to work as well, right? So
our employees don't get to choose their 5.
Right. They're thrown into that. They're thrown into a group.
And this when I, when we talked about this, discussed it, this made me lose sleep at night, literally. That if I'm hiring just anyone or keeping poor performers, rock stars that we have, are one or two things going to happen to them, right? They're going to get the hell out of here because A players hate working with C and B minus players. But even worse for them, if they stay and give the company the benefit of the doubt, they're going to gravitate to the average. And then leaders are going to blame them. What the hell happened to Dave Murray? What the hell happened to Lindsay? She used to be, and now she's, a negative Nancy. She's always complaining. That's our fault.
Right. And, we're going to talk about this further in some of our upcoming sessions about how work is contagious, right? That attitude about work, those habits about work are contagious. And so when organizations are just settling for somebody and just throwing somebody into the mix, it can cause a lot of chaos, especially with a high performing team. And there's some data that backs that up that we're going to share in one of our future sessions.
This one, you could go to chat and I want you to answer this before I reveal it. Employees do not quit companies. They quit. And let's see what you answer here, finishing this quote. Yeah. Bosses, people, managers, they're managers. Okay. So a lot of people got my right answer, if you will. The old quote goes, employees don't quit companies, they quit bosses or managers or leaders. I've changed it. We've tweaked it, and it's people. And it just goes back to, yes, we quit bosses, as we've shown, but also from the previous slide, you are the average of the 5 people you work with. Listen, if we accept mediocre, miserable people, employees are going to get the hell out of there. And we've all had that. So,
I want to add one thing to that, John, too. Yeah. We talk about this a lot when we're working on the consulting side of our business and working with our clients and focus on world-class leadership and world-class internal culture workshops. And again, we'll get more into those during these sessions as well. But it amazes me that we just shared a couple of data points today, just in the 30 minutes, a couple of data points that show how important that relationship is between a boss and someone that reports to them. Right? How important it is for them sticking around, doing their job well, staying with the company, all those things. Yet so many organizations don't actually have that as a strategy, right? They're not training their managers to cultivate that relationship. It's almost like they're hoping it happens without any sort of real work or real training to facilitate that. And so I think for so many organizations, especially those that might be experiencing high turnover, it's just a missed opportunity.
Yeah. And this goes along with the previous slide. We talked about the biggest expense is unhappy employees. Every business out there, including mine, is interested in earning profits, but sometimes the bottom line is not the best indicator of a company's long-term health. In the wake of the Great Resignation, companies are scrambling to hold on to both employees and profits. It turns out that one answer is the key to both. The employee experience revolution divulges the little-known secret of how to become a more profitable company in both short and long-term. Happy employees. Your customers will never be happier than your employees. Your people create and deliver the experience that keeps customers coming back. Countless studies, including this one that we're showing, shows irrefutable evidence between employee satisfaction and customer loyalty and profitability. One study shows how a call center weekly sales increased by 25% when their happiness increased by 1 point on a scale of 1 to 5. Other research found in the Journal of Applied Psychology titled Business Unit Level Relationships Between Employee Satisfaction, Employee Engagement, and Business Outcomes found that the top 25% of brands with the highest employee engagement enjoyed 1 to 4 percentage points higher profit margins than those in the bottom 25. That should satisfy the shareholder theorists. Leaders. Leading is the pinnacle of human achievement. Your number one task is helping others grow and develop and contribute to their colleagues and community. Your accomplishment list will be measured by those who went on to wildly successful careers in large measure because of the time they spent with you. We need to build the type of companies that helps employees be their best selves and an opportunity to live their best lives. So that is a high level first chapter, basically, of why the employee experience revolution. Our definition of an employee experience revolution is great companies help people live extraordinary lives. Their leaders inspire employees to build lives of meaning and purpose. So I know we have a lot of leaders on this, listening to this webinar, and hopefully that resonates with you. If it doesn't, or if it doesn't resonate with some leaders on your team, I think it says something. So again, the next chapter 3 is the power of purpose. Then we get into, and these are all upcoming webinars, creating a recruitment experience, creating an onboarding experience. Everything has to be an experience. Creating an employee experience that retains them, tearing down silos by building collaboration across departments, building and developing great leaders to avoid the accidental manager thing, and leaving a leadership legacy. So we will throw this back to lovely Lindsay.
Thank you, guys. So we do have a few questions, John and Dave, so I'm just going to jump right in from Victor. Hi, Victor.
Hi, Victor.
Yeah, KeyBank Victor. So he said,
KeyBank Victor.
Yeah. So I am working in creating a holistic leadership program / culture, world-class leadership. Have you seen any instances where providing leadership training or support in a more holistic and comprehensive program has resulted in tangible results and morale as he builds a stronger case for the program? That's a lot.
Dave, I'll let you take this one. You are doing this so much with clients.
100%. We've seen that, Victor. So the key is we have to form a baseline. So very often where we see the positives coming out of this work is in things like team member retention. And so we need to make sure, and this kind of goes to Britt Whalen's on here as well. With the next question is, are companies being receptive? And it kind of answers this question too, Britt. What we need to do with organizations is make sure that they understand the dollars and cents behind this, right? A lot of times, especially maybe the CFO sees this as, oh, that sounds nice. And having happy employers or employees sounds like it's a nice thing to have, but is it worth the investment? Is it worth the squeeze? Is it worth the time and dollars? So we have to find that baseline of where we're going to add value. So typically where we find that is in turnover, right? And knowing what your expenses are. And again, if you lose somebody, it's typically about half their annual salary to replace them. If you lose a rock star, a lot of times it's almost 2 times their annual salary to replace them in their productivity. So we're talking some real dollars and cents there. So if you're able to extend someone's life cycle with the organization by 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever that is, what does that equate to in dollars and cents? So finding that baseline of, okay, what's our current retention or lack of retention? Where are we losing people? Where and why? And then start to implement this to see where you make the improvements. There's also
one thing I want to add to that, yep, Dave, is, the cost that you can't factor in is, if people are quitting around me, then I start questioning, am I the idiot for staying? And morale, and what's wrong with this company, and what's wrong with me? And maybe I should call Dave and find out why he left, and maybe, he's going to recruit me to go with him. And it's just not a good trend. Again, we don't want to keep everyone, but we got to keep our best employees and measure employee engagement. And there's so many great specifics. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
Yeah. And Victor threw in a follow-up question I'm going to go to before we go to Brooke, because it's along the same lines. Victor said, what are some of the common pitfalls that get in the way? And here's what happens. I would say the number one pitfall, the number one roadblock to this is time, right? So if we create some tools and we roll them out to our managers, especially our mid-level managers, and we say, hey, we want you to focus on this. We want you to build relationships, support your team members, et cetera. But we don't explicitly give them the time to do that, right? It's just supposed to kind of magically fall into all their other tasks every day and just fit and work. Then we know it's going to fall by the wayside. So all of our managers that we're then asking to really take this and run with it need to understand the why it's important, the what's in it for me. So as a leader, what are some of my pain points that are going to lessen because I'm doing this, I'm focused on this, because there will be some. And then making sure that they understand that, okay, this is part of my job and I do have the time to do it. I have to get this done. It's part of my job description. I'm going to be reviewed on this, just like my sales numbers or whatever the other metrics are. So really making sure they understand that and then giving them the time to do so. A lot of times it's a great opportunity for them to maybe start delegating some tasks to some other folks on their team and start to elevate some of their other team members as well.
And we really go into detail in this in the coming chapters. But okay, Lynn, do you want to ask us the next question?
Absolutely. We have a couple more. So this comes from Brooke. Hi, Brooke. Do you explore any particular case studies or real world examples that illustrate the principles or concepts you discuss in your new book? If so, could you share one that particularly resonated with you?
So that's what the entire book is. It's not theories. It's here's how, companies do that. So Dave, we had to reread the book this week to get the final manuscript to the publisher so they could. What comes to your mind? I mean, I like literally so many.
I have a great one I'll share first.
Good.
I think John too. Some of your New Day examples are great here as well. But one that comes to my mind, I had the chance to work with Intermountain Health. They're a healthcare system in Utah and Nevada, and I was out working in their Nevada offices. And we were working specifically on internal culture, which was one of the chapters we'll get to. So we were working on teams working together inside the organization, because what we learn is, and it's in everyone's business, if we're not cohesive, if we're not working well, if we're not focused on clear handoffs and not dropping the ball between each other, what's going to happen is that customer, or in their case, the patient, is going to feel the effect of it, right? They're the ones left kind of holding the bag and not getting their questions answered. So we were focused on internal culture with a large group of their employees. Some were from their internal contact center, some were from some of their clinics, and they had never met each other, right? The clinics are out doing their thing. They're almost like a different company. The contact center is supporting them, right? Booking appointments, changing appointments, et cetera. But they never really met each other in person. And someone actually stood up in our workshop and from the call center and said, you know what? I never met you before. I just seen your name and emails and stuff. Now that I've met you, it's going to be much harder to throw you under the bus. And it was funny in the moment, but the reality is that's what we're trying to do, right? That's what happens when you're just an email or just a phone number, or even though you're my teammate. It's easier for me to just pass that blame on to the other department. And that's what we're trying to alleviate.
And again, we're going to go deep in each one of these. We do in the book, but it's understanding a day in the life of a coworker. What's a day in the life of a sales if you're a consultant, right? In our world, and vice versa. Neither of them has ever done the other person's job. And sometimes they could be like, what's going on here? So, there's a lot, and we will go in deeper as the book does. Linz?
All right. Charlie, thank you for your question. You're next. Charlie said, how do you balance delivering above and beyond experiences with team members, getting a sense of entitlement, and taking advantage of the company's generosity?
So, I think of this like above and beyond for customers, or a charitable assumption for customers. Don't punish 98% of your customers for what you're afraid 2% are going to may try to take advantage of. We just trust our employees, and therefore they trust us, and they will, go through a fire for us, with us. Yes, over time, is there, a small percentage that may have, worked it, and probably, but I'm okay. And then we can handle that one-off. We can coach, find a better fit company for whatever that may look like, but it's rare. And what we have gotten, what the companies we feature and work with have gotten back from doing this type of culture blows it away. So I think like with customers, we maybe, I don't want to say exaggerate, but overemphasize the one that took advantage of us and make it feel like it's 50% when it's really such a small fraction. And so many of us on this webinar deal with companies that don't make us there's zero risk to do business with. So we continue to do business with them. So they're getting our business, and we've never taken advantage of them. So,
and I'll just add to that, John, we have to remember too, that trust is a two-way street. So as
Right.
we're building trust as an organization with our team members, they're building that back with us. Where I see abuse like this take place is usually where there is not a great culture. There's room to focus and grow the culture. And so a lot of times that's more of employees kind of trying to get what they feel entitled to because they're not getting it elsewhere. They're not getting the recognition that they feel is appropriate because the organization isn't focused on it.
I almost think of it like stealing, right? It happens. We've all been victims of it. If you want to say, if you've been a leader or a business owner for long enough, but while we don't want it to happen and we hope to deter it, I'm not locking everything up, right? I'm not, and treat all our employees like they're thieves. So, it's similar to me. Linz?
All right. Last question. Cassandra. Dave, you know Cassandra.
Hi, Cassandra.
Yeah. So in the companies that you have worked with that seem to have the best employee morale and culture, is there one main thing that you see these companies do consistently? That's a great question.
That's a great question.
It is. I actually have two things that pop into my mind right away. They're both covered in the book in future chapters. Mm-hmm. One is that they are focused on and purposeful about recognition. Kind of goes back to that last question of how do you stop people from taking advantage?
Yeah.
Well, if we're proactive and we're recognizing and we're making sure we're giving those shout outs and accolades to those who truly deserve it. It's not always giving away money. It's not always a gift card. Sometimes it's as simple as that recognition in front of your peers. They're doing that on a regular basis, right? They're making sure that their leaders, their managers know that it's part of their job to do that when it's warranted. And the other thing that comes to mind that I see that works so well for organizations is when they have a system in place where they are regularly conducting one-on-one meetings and holding those meetings well, right? What I mean by that is, again, we have a whole chapter on this. What I mean by that is it's not just a meeting where the team member walks in and the manager starts saying, okay, you're doing this wrong, and focus on this, right? It's a two-way. It's building the relationship. It's really more the employees meeting. We actually have a statistic in the book where it says that in those meetings, managers should talk like 10% of the time, and the employees should talk about 90% of the time and share what they're excited about, what they want to work on. But so a lot of enough organizations don't make a one-on-one part of the culture to begin with. So that's a missed opportunity. But then the second part of that is very often they're not happening well. So you need to make sure they're happening and that your managers have a template to do that well.
And I'm just going to add, what I say, and there's a lot of things. There's never one thing, but it's the way they avoid accidental managers, that they select the right people, and not only select the right people to lead, but they train them constantly to make sure. One of my favorite quotes for leadership, parenting, whatever you want to call it, is go show the proper way, and when necessary, use words. I love that. Instead of saying, Lindsay, why haven't you? Dave, why haven't you? Victor, why haven't you? If I model the behavior of respect, trust, caring, I don't have to worry about, the people underneath me, whatever you want to call it, with me, doing that to each other and to the customer. So go show the proper way, and when necessary, use words.
Do you want to credit the person behind that quote?
Who? I don't even know.
St. Ignatius of Loyola.
Oh, of course, because you went to St. Ignatius. I don't believe it. It was probably St. Joseph, where I went to school. But anyway, this was awesome. Thank you. We very few people. We didn't lose anyone. Great engagement. We are excited. Great job, Dave Murray, author, and Lindsay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Let's wrap up this episode with my mantra, living an extraordinary life so countless others do. Last week, my youngest son, Bo, who's in college at Long Island University, was on spring break. So me and him took a guy's trip to Scottsdale, Arizona, where the Cleveland Guardians, formerly known as the Cleveland Indians, do their spring training. I've tried to do this every year since my boys were young, take each of them individually on a trip just with Dad. I was really good at it, but then when high school and college came, it got a little harder and harder with their activities, sports, and whatever. But it was really cool. I got to do this with Bo, and it brought me back to when he was like 6 years old. You know, he's 21, but he was just a kid. He loves baseball. We looked up the statistics and who the minor leaguers were that were trying to make the major league team for opening day, acting like, you know, we had some input and trying to figure out who should stay and who should get sent to the minors. And it was just a great trip. You know, my son was very present. And, you know, we just talked and we watched episodes of our favorite show at night in the hotel and, you know, just had just a wonderful trip. So if this isn't something you're doing, and, you know, I didn't think I would continue to do this as they became adults, but I am. And it was one of my favorite one-on-one trips I've ever taken. And all of them have been amazing. So it just brought me back to what it was like being a dad, being their buddy, and just having that common bond of something we're both passionate about. So thanks for joining us on this week's episode of the Customer Service Revolution podcast, and live an extraordinary life so countless others do.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to give the Customer Service Revolution podcast a thumbs up and write us a review. To hear more episodes, subscribe now on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening and for being part of the Customer Service Revolution.